Well, I'm going to begin the meeting. It's 7:30, less 30 seconds. I'm Jamie McLaughlin, acting chair tonight of the Board of Finance, and we understand Jim Palin will not be with us, so we have a full group that's accounted for. Just for the public's information, we're in a round of budget review that includes a few budget discussions on some departments. Building control, police, public works, parks and rec, and general government. We're going to, given Diana's partnered with Jim Palin, we're going to push building control back, pick that up at our next meeting, and given we weren't prepared to discuss police, and there's some pretty sensitive issues there, we're going to push that back a week as well. So we have a very light evening this evening. Would like to start, if I can, with Public Works.
Sure. For people with our budget books, 143, Public Works starts there. I want to actually start on, let's start on 153, which is DPW Management and Engineering. Some of these departments have so little changes. So 153 shows a decrease of $402 overall. Just standard increases on some of these things. On professional services, small decrease in there for right-of-way maps, they called it, software for that. Other than that, just a small increase in this particular department. Turning the page to 154, roadways and walkway maintenance. Draw your attention to the $33,000 for full-time salary. That's contractual. That's just your contractual increase there. On overtime, 74 increase. They've budgeted for 11 storms and 7 other storms. I'm sorry, 11 storms at double time, 7 storms at time and a half, causing the 74 increase there. Going down the rest of the list here, the motor fuels and lubricant decrease of $12,587. Renegotiation of gas contract there, causing a pretty nice pickup for us of $12,567 in the positive for us. And then tires, $4,000 increase. We're changing the tires on the loaders every 2 years. Questions on this one?
Rob, I thought and it was an interesting discussion on recycling because we get revenue from that. I'm not sure if it was Jamie Stevenson, but somebody had a great quote that apparently we have good trash. Was it you, Jamie? But the notion was that we are doing such a good job as a town, and our garbage is pristine, that it's worth more, and so. $73,000, to be specific. How about on the capital side, Rob?
Jamie, if I might just add.
Yeah, if you can. Thanks,
John. Jack Davis, 197 Hoyt Street. It doesn't relate to this budget, but I have sent around, and I can forward it to the Board of Finance, and I know that Jamie and Kate are already aware of it. But there is a change going on in recycling, and many of the other communities who are up for contract have seen a significant change from revenue to expense. And so, I mean, it's really great because I participate in the mulching thing, which also helps us, but at least the board should be cognizant that while it doesn't affect this current year, when our contract does expire, we may see a change in the town's revenue source.
Well, it's an interesting topic. It came up at the Board of Selectmen's review, Jack. They mentioned both Norwalk and Stamford were, and I think the word was significantly down.
Yeah.
Just as a purely background, because it's a fascinating issue. You can't really do recycling. I mean, theoretically, recycling means you have to create a market. So when we were first looking at recycling in the 1980s, I was on the Environment Committee for 10 years. creating those markets required there to be a buyer. Well, there weren't buyers. So there was a lot of municipal solid waste and a lot of processing expense that was in the early days part of building markets. Well, markets are cyclical. Markets for reused paper, for glass, they're commodity markets and they're cyclical. So we're going through a period of time right now where there is a real low demand for a lot of quality recycled materials, let alone poorly recycled materials. So that we're getting any offset in revenue is a good thing for the town, but it's not a permanent fix if the markets remain poor.
Well, there's two things to that, only because I happen to be a tree hugger in certain ways. Number one of the markets that China does not affect is our cardboard market. So pizza boxes do not belong in our recycling. They do belong in the trash because they're contaminated. And it drives me nuts when I go to the transfer station and I see all the boxes in the single stream as opposed to the separate box, because that's a U.S. market recyclable, which may not be changing. The other thing is places like Florida have been using glass, which seems to be out of favor right now, on their beaches and in their roads. So it's, I think one of the things that some of the towns have requested from the state is to start to look at how you create market and how the state can reuse this and perhaps bring down costs to states and towns, and I think that's a great effort for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jack.
If you would indulge me in just a
Yeah.
quick comment on this.
Thanks, Jamie.
Good evening, Jamie Stevenson, your first selectman, 65 St. Nicholas Road. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. It's important to actually look at the revenue breakdown here, because while there is one component of the recyclables that is certainly impacted by the change in the world market for recyclables, you'll see that we have compost, scrap metal, and textile recyclables that are actually doing well and holding steady. So I'm confident that we want to encourage people to continue their behaviors of recycling. I've made that comment to our sustainability committee. We don't want to go backwards in terms of human behavior, and hope that American ingenuity will try and catch up and create a market for our recyclables. But because our sustainability committee and our Public Works Department have done such a good job on sort of differentiating these pieces of recycling, I think that we're probably a little bit better off than some other communities.
And we'll take them.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rob, over to capital, DPW capital.
Let's finish off the whole.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, let's just finish off the column.
You go for it.
156, after we were just talking about the revenues.
Yep.
Just a decrease mostly driven by solid waste. That's a straight formula, rates for and tonnage. So it's just a straight formula to give us that small decrease. Looking down revenues at 157. Hey, Jen, I didn't hear this on the presentation. So we're down 48,000 on the rent for town hall. What's driving that?
You should have a corrected page in there. It was just
Oh.
an oversight that it wasn't
Okay.
included, but I think we put it in at 35,000,
Yeah, that's
based
right.
on historical
Okay.
actuals.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Jumping to 158, small increase of 21,000 in this department. Couple items, software maintenance and support, town hall, HVAC. We're looking for more efficiencies out of that. And what else did I have? And obviously you had at the top, salary and overtime, salary increase on contractual basis and overtime. I didn't see a reason given for the kind of rather large increase on that one of 58,
Let me
5610, sorry.
A large part of that is events that are occurring on weekends. As the building is open more, they're having to staff custodians here.
Perfect. 159, a page down. Small decrease in departmental revenues driven from services for parking fund there. Interesting little note, park fund versus general fund depends on who owns the parking lot, who gets the revenue. And just jumping to the last page on here.
And
before we-
Rob, that,
Yep.
I did, that was stated, which is an interesting factoid. And do expenses get allocated accordingly?
They do.
Okay.
And last page, 160, parking operations and maintenance, an increase of 5733, driven by the 5,000 for professional services. So Kate was mentioning that last year nothing was budgeted, so I just think we missed the budget last year, which is showing a $5,000 increase this year. Yep. Questions on that before we jump on capital for Public Works? Page 68, starting on 68, and you guys have this piece. Let's start with, so I'm really just overall, I don't think there's anything here that this board hasn't seen in the past, so I'll start with that. So I'll just talk about a couple things that were taken out first, because I thought they were interesting. The Cherry Lawn basketball court was asked for $80,000. That was turned down and put into next year possibly. The other thing that was taken out was the Holohan backstop. Jamie, I'm not sure if you mentioned this, but it was a really good idea, possibly partnering with Darien Youth Baseball to see if they want to split the cost on this, because everybody's been that backstop. It is in badly needed shape. It needs to be upgraded. But it was an interesting idea of possibly sharing some cost with that organization.
It seems to be the one athletic organization where we haven't yet fostered a public-private partnership. So I wanted to explore that opportunity.
Yeah, so I think it's a good idea.
Can I ask a question about
Yeah.
the basketball court at Cherry Lawn? Because this is the third year we've deferred that,
Yeah.
right? Why do we keep deferring it?
John, you got any insight on Kate? I didn't hear much on it. It sounds like it's needed, but
I don't recall
Yeah.
the thinking behind it.
I kind of,
It's just interesting because it comes up as a deferral every year, and
Right.
it seems like it does need to be done.
Well, there was the only comment I heard was there's only one other basketball court. The question then is, and we really should ask Pam, what's the demand? Isn't that the question? Do we know?
No comment, Marcy, and Parks and Recreation. I mean, it's hard to say what the demand is because it hasn't been functioning for several years. It was in such bad shape,
Well,
they had to
past
close it.
past tense, do we know what the
I
demand?
think there is a lot of demand in the
I think
neighborhood.
they think it is, indeed. I would venture to guess that, well, 1 year it came out because money was used as seed money for the Master Parks Plan.
Right.
And then I think it's an easy one to defer.
Okay.
One needs to make a cut.
There was, Jack Davis, sorry, Cameron. There was a conversation, if I recall, from the master plan to move it from its current location to another park. Certain concerns were raised that where they were moving it might not be an advisable place to put it for reasons other than the parking and that.
Okay. Just a point of information for the audience that's here. If we are going to have comments, would you please come up to the podium? Thanks. Rob?
the rest of the capital, I hate to say this, but it's pretty self-explanatory. 45,000 for the equipment placement program that this Park and Recs has. $15,000 to spend on upgrading some of the playground equipment. $5,000 for tree replacement. I'll skip Short Lane for a second. $8,000 for an irrigation time clock, which is, I think, pretty interesting considering it's going to monitor our water usage, so that's a good thing. Sunshade, so the kids, I guess some of it is, some of the equipment's out in direct sun, so they want to put a sunshade on that. $15,000, I thought was reasonable, and we already talked about the two items that were taken out. Short Lane construction, $500,000 for that. I did have one quick question, because I didn't see it mentioned. This money's for the current landscape architect. So where are we at the RFP, or is just, it has to wait till it's approved, then it moves forward?
Well, the request was $500,000, but the Board of Selectmen reduced it to $50,000 to do some work there, but defer the bulk of the project to the following year.
Okay.
Rob, I don't want to get you into any more of a procedural knot than you've already put yourself in, but you moved from the Department of Public Works to Parks and Rec. It's no big deal,
Oh.
just for the audience's
geez, okay,
purposes.
sorry, yeah.
No worry.
Look at me.
So we're going to go back to the Department of Public Works capital, but we moved to the Parks and Rec's capital, which we're currently discussing. So stay with it, Rob, stay with it.
Stay with,
Page 68, where you were
I had-
bookmarking
Yeah.
Short Lane.
I had nothing else on Parks and Rec's capital.
Well, we might want to comment on Short Lane. Only that the Short Lane project was an acquisition that we've made. We've made a capital commitment to it. The upgrade includes ultimately an overflow for parking. We expect more usage. The question is, $500,000 there, likely some pickups at Highland Farms. Is there a bonding opportunity? I'd say it's highly likely. That's a big number, but we really don't
But
know.
wasn't that just turned
Yeah.
down?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
If you'd like me to comment.
Yeah.
And I'll come to them. Thank you very much. So, the Board of Selectmen felt like we were making substantial investments in the area of Parks and Recreation this year. Asking Kate, our town administrator, had put forward a 3-year phase-in of the improvements at Highland Farms. And we feel it's important to not phase that project. So we front-loaded and have asked for all of the money that we need to get Highland Farms up and operational. And we also know that we are working through the Pear Tree Point Building Committee process and hopefully moving toward a project there. So in the interest of trying to prioritize, we decided that we would wait on the Short Lane property, but give them a little bit of money so that the staff, the Parks and Rec facility staff, could continue to make some improvements for which they can do the work on that property so that people can enjoy it at least for the next year until we are able to move forward a bigger project.
Good, terrific, thank
Yeah.
you, Jamie, thank you. Okay, Rob, up to you whether you want to go
Let's go back to Public Works.
Yes, great.
We'll go Public Works now this time. Page 56 in the book. The first 4 are kind of our normal yearly expenditures. Equipment reserve, sidewalk rehabilitation, paving of the town. We usually try to do 4 miles. Ed said that a couple of times over. And then tree replacement for $5,000. Then let's talk about the next 6 items, which are new items for this year. So town hall generator. This seems to be the project that never goes away. Another $50,000, just a little background. I know some of the members here have the written verbiage of what it says. Just a couple of things. The $50,000 we're going up because of, we were going to put in a gas generator, we're now going to a diesel generator. So because of that, we're doing a little reconfiguration, and it's an extra $50,000 for that. It's going to actually give us a little more space per what Ed talked about in his meeting. Next one, let's jump over to...
Rob, just as a pickup though, if somebody's asked, because why are we going to diesel? We've got natural gas coming down here. I was impressed that the differential on the generator alone, forget about the piping and other materials, was $100,000. So Ed Gentile made the case that he'd considered the natural gas versus diesel decision, and it was significant, and that the natural gas option was pretty cost prohibitive.
Yeah, he mentioned that. Yeah, in his comments.
Yeah.
Jumping over to Work being done, Norotan Heights and Ledge, $175,000. This intersection is always kind of dicey if you guys have been there, so we're finally going to put some money toward this to try to keep this project moving. It's $175,000. It's eligible for actual funds coming back from the state, but my understanding, and Jamie, I think you said this in the meeting, is we have to kind of get started and keep this project going, so that's why the 175 is allocated, but we're expecting funds back from the state.
I would invite Jamie to comment on it, because there's a Westcog approval process as well.
Yeah.
Right, so this is a project that's eligible for a pot of money called LOTSIP, Local Transportation Capital Improvement Program funding. And in order to get in the queue and get a commitment of funding through the Council of Governments, you have to evidence that the local government has approved the match, which is a 20% match. Mm-hmm. So in order to get in line and get in the queue to get this project funded through LOTSIP, we had to allocate it in this budget cycle. I strongly recommend the Board of Finance supports this project because anybody that sat in the queue on Ledge Road understands that we desperately need a right turn lane, which the project will allow for 2 lanes, including a right turn lane off of Ledge onto Norotan Avenue. So very much appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Jamie.
63 new sidewalks for $200,000. Emphasis trying to do these near schools and trains. Some of the detail behind this, they're going to try to do Edgerton from Elm to West, and Mansfield, I believe it was Overbrook, from Overbrook to Mansfield Place. Questions?
Yep. And I'd only indicate, I think the sidewalk plan here sometimes gets politicized. A lot of public safety considerations, a lot of school traffic considerations were taken into account, so a lot of logic in that plan.
There's a, I don't know, is this just a typo that, oh, sorry. Never mind. Oh my God, it was on the other, the Norotan Ledge.
Is that it, Rob?
A couple more.
Okay.
Town Hall gym upgrades,
Oh, yeah.
glass replacements, $75,000 for that. We don't know how old the windows are. I did have a question and I didn't see it, maybe it's a follow-up, is how many windows are we doing? I didn't see a number given anywhere. So I just would be curious how many that is, but, so.
Jen, do you have any comment?
I do not.
No, no worry. I didn't, I listened to it as well, I don't think we heard.
No, there's no number. Next one, 25, for carpet replacement here. Seems like another project we do pretty often. So this one's for the hallways here. And let's see, concrete steps outside, $20,000. I believe this is a space when you walk out and you're going left, like you're going down the stairs. We're finally going to get those stairs done. I would just ask one thing there, can we add lights? It's pretty dark there, if you guys have ever walked down that after one of the RTM meetings or one of our meetings. So if we're going to do the redo, let's make sure there's more lights added in. Thank you for the nod.
Rob, that was very illuminating. Thank you.
Eliminating. And lastly, $5,000 for tree replacement. I'm sorry, that was back up the other one. Questions on capital for Public Works?
If I might.
Caller?
Jack Davis, consistent with the buddy system, on March 11th, the RTM finance.
Jack, you refer to the buddy system. What does that mean?
That is matching members from the RTM Finance and Budget Committee with the Board of Finance, with the overall concept between the board and the RTM to have conversations on the budget with the prior boards first, but then also with the Board of Finance before they take their final vote, so that there are no surprises in the RTM meeting. Essentially, it's collaboration, working together, and hearing each other's ideas, which we're very thankful that the Board of Finance has given us the opportunity to do that. To that extent, what happens is that we've tried to move, and Rob knows this, having been a former member of it, we've been trying year after year to move our budget deliberations up almost ahead of the Board of Finance, so that essentially, providing something isn't being done in Hartford, that, and we're all in agreement, 5 minutes after the Board of Finance approves the budgets, F&B is essentially ready to do the same. And it's made for a lot less work from us as well. To that extent, what I do want to say is that we did discuss the two capital programs from the two areas, and including what Jamie had mentioned on the Parks and Recs, and the consensus of F&B was to fully support the capital budgets as they are currently presented.
Great, thank you, Jack. I just had one comment, Rob, just for, I think it came up, I don't think it's insubstantial, but it came up in discussion, that because of the expected improvements in utilization at Short Lane at some point in time, and without question at Highland Farms, our rate of utilization is expected to increase. So there are, it may not affect this year's budget because those are still in planning stages, but there's coming down the pike potential for operating and potentially even personnel impacts from those two places. So just a heads up. So that takes care of Parks and Rec and Department of Public Works. Rob, thank you very much for those reports.
Let's go back to Park and Rec,
Park
just
and Rec.
just the overall budget.
Okay.
Okay.
Well taken.
Yep.
Yep.
195,
Thank you, Rob.
you're welcome. Just on the narrative, I just wanted to pay a compliment to the group on something I saw that was interesting on the performance measures. Volunteers, hours worked, and dollars saved. That number continues to go up, so if you guys look at page 200 on the performance measures, 10 volunteers, 30, and now 50 we're projecting this year, so well done by the group. So I just wanted to say that before we started. That's 203, Parks and Rec admin. I mean, it's a 0.3 increase here,
Yeah.
so I'd like to skip over that and move on. 204 for revenues for beach passes. I didn't hear this said. We have an $18,000 increase. Are we going up in fees, Jen? Do you know this year? Did we add $1 to this year? I didn't.
Look at the detail, give me 1 second. No, it's based on historical average.
Averages? Okay.
Not average, but historical in 17-18 was 326,000. So they bumped up
So we're
their
just at
estimate
the-
for
we're
this year
just-
to be
yeah.
in line with that.
Gotcha. Nothing of consequence on 205, so then jumping to 206. So this is one of our, so if you look at the overall budget, we have 4 ads, 3 for civil dispatch and 1 for here for Park and Recs. So just concentrate on the full-time. If you this group lost an employee in January 17, transferred over to Public Works. You can kind of see that in the salary line. It goes from 350 down to 318, down to 297. Now it's ramping back up with this potential new person. Numerous discussion on this. I'll just kick it off by just saying, I think we've seen, kind of late in the day, I got some numbers from the department to see the hours that are used and what areas they're used. I'd like some more time to digest that. I'll pass this to the group here so they can see it. But it's interesting because I think between Short Lane and Highland Falls, and there was in the calls, it was a Dillard property, and unless I'm not hearing that right, so you have 3 added facilities that have to be maintained. So that is causing the potential for a new person here, which is what this group is asking for.
Just to comment on that, we didn't see the data from Kate until late this afternoon, but just so that the public has order of magnitude in mind. And the good news is that we're accounting for the properties in, relatively speaking, meticulous fashion for a grand total of 23,000 and change man-hours across each of the locations, so we know where it's being done. But you can make some projections, which they are making, that indicate there's some man-hours that will demand
Correct.
increased personnel maintenance. So the case is there. I agree, Rob. I wouldn't say I've digested it fully, but intuitively, we're going to see that pattern continue with greater facilities.
Can I have a little color?
Yep.
Yep.
So, Rob, you're exactly right. With the addition of Highland Farms and actually activating that once we finish the construction, there will be some additional maintenance required. Short Lane, we talked about the possibility of some monies attributed to some improvements that staff will make. The Diller property certainly is in conversation right now with the Board of Education on the cross-country path.
Jamie, just because
Yes.
Rob raised it, where is that?
So the Diller property is the piece of property that is bordered by the west portion, which we think of as the upper portion of the oval at Darien High School, Holly Lane and Nutmeg Lane.
Yeah.
It's that parcel of sort of open space in between, and it is deeded parkland. Never really have been able to find a good use for it to date, but there is consideration right now for creating a cross-country trail, because Darien High School cross-country kids can't have home cross-country meets. So in order to create a good path, they would like to use a small portion of the Diller property, which would in fact require that the town takes on the maintenance of that piece of Diller that becomes part of the cross-country trail. So those conversations are still ongoing. It has not been yet approved by the Board of Education, but this budget anticipates that other man-hours would be required to keep that piece of the trail in good repair.
And why is the property not under the control of the Board of Ed? Or do they not want
It's
it?
town-owned, and one of the very good reasons for properties that are in control of Parks and Recreation is to help us keep our stock of open space. You know, if that were to be developed by any town entity, including the Board of Ed, we would have to replace the open space somewhere else in the town of Darien. So it gives the town a little bit of flexibility to keep that as open space, and in this case dedicated as parkland so that we can preserve it in perpetuity.
Thank you.
If I might,
Sure.
Not that place, Jack, not the carpet ball.
yeah, no, I wasn't, exactly. I do want to mention that at our meeting in March, F&B felt that the Park and Rec Department had not provided Kate with sufficient documentation at this time to substantiate the addition of that FTE. There was questions whether or not, as we're moving forward, whether or not paying overtime, at least in the next budget year, wouldn't have been a more cost-effective rationale as opposed to taking on somebody with full salary and benefits. There was questions whether or not that could have been supplemented with seasonal employees, which we use. So it wasn't that we were against the position. We were rather stating that there wasn't sufficient documentation at the time from Park and Rec presented to Kate that F&B could support at that time. So any information you do have, I would appreciate you passing on so that we, you know, as I said, we would support it if we had such analysis. So,
The revolving podium. I don't mean to prolong your meeting. I'd like to reframe the conversation about this position. please remember that it is actually a replacement position. The person that was in this job was moved to Public Works. So really, the conversation is about justifying keeping the additional personnel in the Public Works Department, which we fully support. But as a result of Parks and Rec losing that full-time FTE, the director of that department has taken on a laborer role, which we feel is not the highest and best use of department management. So I just offer that as additional color.
Yeah. We'll take a couple of other issues that came out as well. Looking at a part-time employee, less than 20 hours a week, that's a difficult market to find people in, as was discussed. And the other thing that's, it's the old canard we don't really want to discuss, but the notion of what's happened for the Board of Education with the development of their fields, largely that are non-natural grass facilities, implies the displacement of some cost for the maintenance of those facilities that was previously had an impact. And it raises the issue for us to look at shared services wherever possible. I know that may be a hollow assertion, but it certainly begs the issue that we have a facilities management overlap opportunity to do something with the Board of Education. So it's on my notes to actually raise that issue, because it surfaces an issue that's a very real one, which the Board of Education can answer us, I'm sure. Anything else?
Last comment
Yep.
on Parks and Recs, just so people see this. 207 and 208, you guys will see the $495,000, both booked as a revenue and the corresponding expense. It's just a book change, right, Jen, from last year?
Right. There's self-funded, or their self-sustaining programs were previously, all the revenue and all the expense would run through an account on the balance sheet. And any excess funds after they covered their costs would transfer over as Park and Rec program revenue. We're eliminating that balance sheet account, and we want all of the program activity, both sides of it, to come into the revenues and expenses for the departments.
Right, just wanted to point that out, make sure people looked at it. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Rob. Great work. We have some light lifting tonight. Remaining is general government. Frank and Paul.
Want me to start, Paul?
I'll defer to Frank.
Well, actually, you're right about this. It's pretty light. You know, some of the numbers that jump off the page at you are frankly just movements in the way things are accounted for rather than actual changes. This shows up in the, the parking ticket area. It shows up one place, moving someone from a temporary position to a permanent position. And then there are items like the, I don't know, people would mention that the audit number for, not the budget number, but the number for this year seemed high, which is just just reflects the fact that it hasn't been fully billed out to the Board of Ed, its
Right.
portion. A couple of sort of real items, if you will, and changes are the elections people, the voter people are budgeting a primary for May of 2020.
Two primaries.
Two primaries, yes. Well, they're budgeting one for the fiscal year, and they're expecting another one for the following fiscal year.
In other words, both Democrat and Republican.
They're budgeting one for May 2020, and then there may also be one in August of 2020, I think is.
That would be right.
That may not turn
Frank,
out.
may I ask, just, and it's small potatoes here, is that the practice that we assume there'll be a primary?
If it's very likely, which in a presidential year, it would be very likely, and we let the registrars use their discretion.
Yeah.
If they think that it's very likely, then we do include it in the budget. If we think there's only a slight possibility, we don't include it in the budget and we would draw from contingency.
I think it's been a while before it's actually been in the budget.
But this is a presidential election.
Yeah, seems very likely, doesn't it?
Seems to be a few candidates that are interested.
I want to, by the way, say that Kate made a lot of time available to Paul and me, which was very much appreciated, and she couldn't have been more open, and so that was very helpful. The IT costs are up. I'm not sure they're up kind of more than other items are up. I don't think that's a frightening, I think that's in fact a
That's
positive.
because
But is that
the Board of Ed added a person, and we
Yeah.
share in the expense of that person.
What'd that person do, Paul?
What?
What do they, just overlap, just,
Shared services.
well, good to hear that. I'm pleased to hear that,
Yes,
Paul. That
I'm
really tickles
well-versed
my
in that
fancy.
buzzword. I follow Senator Duff.
And then two things to note, on page 45, there's the assumption that we'll want to examine. There's an assumption about the property tax collection rate, which I think varies from what our formula that we had adopted earlier. So I think that rate, we'll have to talk about that.
Right, the number that you see in there is just the number to balance the Board of Selectmen budget. That changes when we incorporate the Board of Education request, and then we've got the new formula when we set the mill rate for what the assumed collection rate will be.
That'll actually drive down the increase a little bit.
Right. And that's something that I've handed out to everybody. It shows a few years of history on collections, supplemental taxes. So if you'd like to see anything else in that analysis, let me know.
But that is an important, you're looking at a run rate, or you're using an Olympic average or something, that
Rolling 5-year average
rolling five?
and less 25 basis points to give us a little bit of a cushion.
Good, terrific, good.
And actually, when you look at that sheet that I handed out, for the last several years, so we set the mill rate based on our assumed tax levy, what the grand list is at the time, and what we think we're going to levy on it. But for the last several years, there's been a net decrease when we get to the final levy. So it's interesting to look at what the collections are as a percentage of our original assumption versus against the final levy.
The only
And that
thing,
does vary.
I think it's by the way, the only reason I want to spend some time on it, this is real money.
Yeah.
You know my nitpicking rule. So on the numbers that you're running now, which concerns me a little bit, I mentioned this to Jay-Z, we're in I'm not sure if we're at the tail end, I don't have a crystal ball, but we're in a very long business cycle. And I would assume rates are correlated to the business cycle. And that if we're only accounting for 5 years, it's been a pretty rosy period of time. So what could it be if we have a change in the business cycle is an issue that, if we could run some sensitivity on that, I'd feel
Right,
more
and
comfortable.
that's something, that was part of the reason why I didn't want to make this calculation a formal adopted policy, because I think we should have these discussions about what other economic
Yeah.
conditions are going on. But when you look at what I've handed out, so in fiscal 2013, fiscal 2014, our collections as a percent of our estimated levy against our budget assumption were 98.89 and 98.88. And then we started getting significantly over 99. So it is very possible that with a downturn, we would go back to
Well, these
lower
are,
numbers.
but I think again for the public, these are remarkable numbers. They're really remarkable numbers. You know, it would put us in several handfuls of municipal districts in the country that can say that. So they're just remarkable, and so therefore, and that's a big number. We're getting into the 385,000, 284,000. These are big numbers. So I don't want to be bullish on that number, and I know it has an effect. We're not going to settle that tonight, but I just think it's a big number.
Well, I can certainly look back and see what our low point was.
Yep,
Yeah, that's a good idea.
yep, okay.
And then one other thing, on page 50, in the discussion with Kate, if you look at the regulatory council dash P and Z line there, you'll notice that the 2019-20 budget is in line with the budget for 2018-2019. But that budget number was a big jump from what was actually spent the prior year. And Kate sees the run rate, the current run rate against the existing budget as being off that 313 number, and therefore it creates the possibility of reducing the budgeted number in, like a 50,000 type dollar range or more for the current year. You see what I'm saying?
So Frank, before you move on that, and I don't want to have to ask Jamie to bounce up again, what are the drivers of that number? And what explains, the number moves from actual 18 to adopted 19, I think substantially. What's driving that? What explains the 118? Is there a special, something I'm missing are we in a special litigation or something? That's a big number.
Professional services.
Thanks, Jamie.
I believe the 118,000 under professional services is because we're in a revaluation and tax appeal cycle.
Right, that makes sense.
So
Right.
it's,
That
so it's,
number, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
not legal.
Yeah.
Thank
Right,
you.
I was focused on the regulatory council number,
Good.
which is, actually, there's some randomness about that because it comes up in the context of often disputes in which the town is not a direct party, but they get subpoenaed or dragged into the proceeding. It is a function to a certain extent of developmental activity too, personal development activity more than commercial. But then the number may be too high to justify the budgeted number, and probably worth taking another look at, and could bring down the cost.
It kind of bounces around, right, Frank? I mean, it's
Yeah.
like 205, 178, 170,
Yeah.
150, and then we're back up to
Yeah.
300. This is one of those.
Yeah. But they often have some feel at this point in the year for what next year's cost will be, because any kind of trial activity is, for next year, is
Yeah.
pretty much scheduled at this point, so. Paul, you want to pick up?
No, I agree with you. The P and Z council may have to do with a lot of the development in the Heights and the hearings on that.
Okay, well, I think that's it for me. You want to do the capital?
We'll see. Too much.
Page 2, I guess?
Yeah, the town hall reserve is listed as 26,000. 6,000 of that is for resurfacing the gym floor.
So there's something for you, Tom.
Surface engine floor. Give me that basketball.
And the remaining 20,000 is redoing the exit doors to the gym. And it says here, risks, the current doors are outdated, heavy, and hard to repair. There is a need for a handicap accessible door opener at this location. The next one is HVAC mechanical upgrades for $50,000. It's to balance the system to make sure it works. Having gone to junior high school in this building, I know it is as long as that. This is not a very well-balanced building, and this is to make sure that the whole system is overhauled. Pneumatic controls, electric controls, and more efficient AC system and reduce electrical costs. And that would be $50,000. And Highland Farms is a big hitter for $250,000. That is to construct 2 parking lots. I believe we heard Chairman Sini at the public hearing address that, and how it gets muddy with the current structure, and it'll make them just more beneficial to users, easier to park, and just clean up the mess when it rains.
And if I might just add to that, the original request from, at the department level was $250,000. And the Board of Selectmen pulled forward, because it was phased, so they pulled all of the funding forward. So what is in their recommended budget is $600,000. And that's one that John has identified for bonding.
And that makes sense, really. It's a single project. It ought to be kind of.
Right.
And then next one is $25,000 for security improvements. It says multiple doors open during working hours. This project would provide security on the rear doors to Town Hall, allowing only employees to enter through them. Other doors would be locked throughout the day, restricting public access to the front door. Doors nearest, not restricting, allowing access by the front door, the doors nearest the gym, and the front entrance to the Mather Center. And this is to enhance security throughout Town Hall. And more on elections, $5,000 is requested for more voting booths, and that has to do with multiple elections this fall and summer, and smooth out the process. And I believe that's...
And we
Didn't
approved.
we buy voting booths
Yeah.
last year? And I
gonna
thought
say.
we had funded that.
You did a special appropriation for, I want to say 16 of them. And they worked very well, and so now the registrars are requesting a few more because they did
They
work
did
so
work
well.
well. They worked really well.
I worked with John Lisi on that, and they really were phenomenal of what they were able to do. I worked with both registers in the requests that they put before. But upon looking at the volume that we had during the last election, they recognized that they needed more. And that, in fact, because they take a smaller footprint, we can have more in the voting locations. So that's part of the reason why you're getting that additional request.
Thanks, Jack.
That's it. There is something on here for network hardware software. I don't have it.
Yeah.
Right, that's a recurring $30,000 that we put in
Ah,
for
okay.
hardware and software.
And how does it get, I mean, is it utilized or?
It's kind of sporadic. It will be used for computer replacements. If a server needs to be replaced, we're doing a lot of updates and changes to the way we're using our Munis financial system. So there may be server specs that require them to change out equipment. This money would be used for something like that. And it's all managed by Jeff Adams, who's the Board of Ed IT director.
Great. Frank, Paul, are you good? Well, we have...
Frank mentioned that one item we may adjust later on. You mentioned the one item in council that we may adjust later on.
So Jen, do you want to talk to Kate and sort of figure out what could be done on that?
Yep, yeah, I'll ask her what her recommendation is for a reduction on that.
Great.
Well, I want to thank everybody for those limited departments that we reviewed tonight, reminding everybody with the calendar, we're going to meet again on Tuesday, April 2nd. I don't have my master in front of me, but I want to just say so it's clear, we're going to do the police department if we can. Let's make that the order of the day. We'll have done our review and homework.
For next week, I know the library is on next week, there's a number of things.
Diana,
like-
can you be ready for building
Yes,
control?
absolutely.
Okay.
Also, the Board of Ed, if I recall, was being moved to that day, which makes sense because on the following Tuesday, they have a Board of Ed. meeting.
Well, that's a big evening, everybody. Let's
Yeah.
budget your time accordingly. Thanks, Jack.
We may want to revisit that. and see
Yeah,
what's-
well, point well taken. Is there any, and if there is there any other business? Oh, great. Well, I just wanted to make a comment that I was sparing everybody at the outset of the meeting, in Al Haig. I was going to begin the meeting by some reference to the Al Haig matter, that I was in charge. But I want to thank Jay-Z for giving me the opportunity to preside this evening, and I'm sure the town will rest at peace that it was only one evening. Hearing no other business or orders, I recognize a motion to adjourn. Diana? Rob? All those in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Great, thank you, everybody.